Hello and welcome to the fourth installment of Ask an Integration Specialist. I'm Daniel Freeman, Integration Coach, joined here by my co-host Gay Lynn, a licensed mental health counselor and addiction specialist. Today I have some very exciting things to go over. There's some breaking news that's happened, but first I'd like to delve into a topic that's extremely important to both of us, which is integration. That's what this whole podcast is about. So I have a question I'll start with. In your experience, what is the primary difference between somebody that retains a message that they have received with plant medicines and someone who just doesn't seem to retain it, who say falls back into old habits, old black and white patterns, even after receiving these insightful or potentially life-changing messages?
That's an excellent question, Daniel, and really is the crux of why we do the work. It does reflect on integration, and in my book, Psychedelic Streams and Rituals, I have all these small writing prompts that encourage people to go in and take their own uh, personal inventory, if you will. If you're working with a program of recovery, any kind of recovery, a recovery from addiction, recovery from codependency, recovery from uh, using your finances in a way that isn't healthy. All of those require us to take our own personal inventory. And when you're working a program of recovery, that's one of the steps. We have to understand and take accountability for our own inventory. And so I wove that into these writing prompts that we begin to take that journey. And it isn't being critical of ourselves. It's not beating ourselves up. It's not putting ourselves down. It's not allowing ourselves to be shamed or shame ourselves, which is a lot of the toxicity that then, if that's not resolved, it reoccurs, it shows up again. So we need to do a personal inventory. We need to do some discovery of ourselves. And I'm sure you've seen this in the people that you've worked with.
Oh yes, 100%. I've actually noticed that one fundamental difference that I've seen is that people that address things in their lives in a holistic way tend to do so much better. And what I mean by that is sometimes there's a tendency for people to try and just say they have an addiction, right? So they're addicted to something, whether it's a substance or a behavior, and they take the approach of, I just want to stop doing this thing, or I want to stop taking this thing, and I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to try to quit and cold turkey, but their social life is poor. They don't have community. They don't have fulfilling hobbies. They hate their job. The list goes on and on. But there's all these other things that they're using the addiction to numb. And when those aren't addressed, and the pain is still fresh, it is I've found it's nigh impossible for people to quit those addictive patterns of behaviors. So that's been a huge breakthrough for me is just looking at the big picture of people's lives. And that's part of taking inventory as well, is just sitting down and being completely honest of, well, people don't just start up addictions just for the fun of it generally. Most of the time it's to numb something. So what is that thing? And sometimes it's kind of hurtful. It's not great always to admit that there is something painful in your life. Sometimes there's a reason people numb it. But going through acknowledging the pain is the first step to ultimately healing the pain. So that's my input on that.
I agree. And what I've found as I've been working with hundreds and thousands of people over 30 years is that the crux of that at some level is a alienation from the self. And what that means to be alienated from yourself means that you have this kind of self-loathing and self-hatred. And so it's not as if it's just happening on the outside of you, or you feel like you run into these people who are rejecting or are unkind or unfair or whatever. It's because internally, you're in that space of self-hatred and self-loathing. And so, as within, so without. So, what do you tend to attract is that people who will reinforce what you already believe about yourself. And so that's fundamentally what we need to change. We need to change what you believe about you. And it's a narrative, it's a story, and it's a story we tell ourselves. And I firmly believe this story can be changed. I firmly believe we are the authors of our own life. The pen is in our hands.
Oh, 100%. I actually have a really good illustration of this that I hope is helpful for people. Because this aspect of ourselves being our own worst enemy, it's it's very true most of the time. So for instance, one of the things that I've struggled with a lot in my life has been having the time and space for the things that are important to me. And these are things like spiritual community or like meaningful projects. And for a long time, there was an external pressure against that. However, one thing I've noticed is that people start to internalize those external pressures sometimes, so that even when the external pressures are gone, they're still carrying that with them. So in my case, the external pressures eventually that were keeping me from doing the things I loved, eventually they started fading away, you know. That at first it was school. Well, I've been out of school for a long time. And then it was certain jobs, but I'm not in those anymore. So in my current environment, I'm in an environment where I do tend to have a lot of flexibility. And there was an important event that I was scheduled to work on. And for a couple of days, I was finding myself very frustrated about this. And suddenly I had kind of an epiphany after a while of sitting in frustration. And I realized, wait a minute, I never asked if I could take that time. I never even asked. I was sitting there frustrated for multiple days, just holding on to this crap. And as soon as I asked, done, just like that. Boom, got the time.
Wow.
So think about all that energy that was just wasted, all the time spent. I could have just been doing anything else other than being frustrated. And that's actually very common. So that's a huge thing that I hope is helpful for people is first step, literally just ask. Or if you need to set a boundary, set a boundary. Ask, set a boundary. And if the boundary is not honored or if what you ask is not received, maybe look at your environment and if you want to be in there. But sometimes people say yes or they just honor the boundary and then you're good. But just don't think about it too long.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have what I call the triple A's.
Mm.
It's just a shorthand way for me to remember this. And it really has been helpful for me and for many other people I've shared with this. You know, when there's something that's going on either internally or externally, maybe it's even a way that we're hurting ourselves, or perhaps it's a way we've hurt someone else. It can be that as well. So we have to admit, we have to apologize, and we have to make amends. And so admit, apologize, make amends. And some of the admitting might be to ourselves. I admit I haven't been very kind to myself with my own thoughts. I'm beating myself up with my own thoughts. And I have to apologize to myself. Like, I'm sorry I've wasted so much energy and just held so much stress around this. It wasn't necessary. And then make amends with yourself. Take the time to then say, next time this happens, I'm going to speak up for myself right away. So that would be if you're doing it for yourself. Admit, apologize, make amends. If you've hurt someone else, what you want to do is that same process. I admit that this happened. I made this mistake. I apologize for this. And this is the way that I can make amends for it. And there's so much useless, unnecessary suffering that goes on when we prolong this, when we really have the ability to make it very short and very concise, just like you described.
Thank you. I love that, and it's been incredibly helpful. Like I've used the process, but I didn't think of it in terms of the AAA, so I appreciate that. There's another step that I'd like to go to, delving even deeper into this. So, even once people are conscious and they're aware, because that's the first step, and that's something that, I do believe plant medicines are really great for just making people aware at a baseline of some of these things. But once people are aware, there can be a lot of deep-seated residual trauma left over. So, for instance, when somebody leaves a cult environment, let's say they were in a cultish environment that told them that if they did certain things, they would be harshly punished. then they leave that environment, but they still are afraid. Like I've had friends that have left cults. They still feared their children going to hell, for instance, long after they were out of there, long after they were in healthier environments. And that's not an indictment against whether heaven or hell is real. It's just that was a they were in a cult. They were in a very particular environment. So how do you start to let go of some of this residual if you have years and years and years of programming so that it's literally rewired your neurons from the time you were a kid? How do you start to let go of that? Because that
It's
tends to
a
stick.
long process, Daniel. I actually have worked with people who have, it's not my specialty, but I have worked with people who have come out of cults. And as a result of that, they did believe things, particularly about themselves, that they were bad, quote unquote, in some way, and that disabled their social development. And that social development is so important in order to have success in life, because really our success depends on our ability to have good, healthy relationships with other people. Darwin really didn't say, they reevaluated some of what he said. It's not the strongest, it's not the mightiest, it's the one that can get along with people. It's the one that can cooperate that survives. And there was a whole retake on some of the early research that was done. So it isn't, you know, uh, the fittest or the fastest necessarily. It helps, for survival. It is the one who can get along and live cooperatively in tribes, in groups with other people. So if that is disabled in some way, and remember, the cult goes for that first, right? We will disable your connections with other people. And so part of that is then healing that, you know, disconnect from other people, because all the other people are considered to be the bad people, right? And it's put in there at such a deep subconscious level from childhood on, in some of these folks, that it's really hard to, one, leave the cult, and two, then learn to rewire their own social networking and social building and friendship building and relationship building and community building skills. So that's a part of what they have to do as they come out. And that can be a lifetime experience right there.
I appreciate you mentioning it's a lifetime experience. Is the reason I brought up cults specifically is because it's a very extreme example of something that's residual, but I think almost everyone has some kind of residual pattern or residual trauma that is going to take a very, very long time. So that's something we say a lot in the integration space, but I'll just go ahead and repeat it again. Yeah, it can take years. It can take a lifetime. I mean, I myself am still constantly peeling back the layers of the onion, as they call it. You resolve one pattern and oh look, there's another pattern underneath.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's a
And there
long
is a
process.
generational curve to that as well, because if the grandparents were in the cult and the parents were in the cult, then it was just assumed that you would be a part of this cult as well. It could also just be a one, some of the cults tend to prey upon people that are not, that are somewhat isolated anyway, and they provide a lot of this love and connection and support that the person is really looking for. And so they're more vulnerable in some way. And so that then becomes their base of connection. To leave that means almost like you're not going to survive. You'll be disenfranchised, you'll be, shunned, and so it's very hard to get out. Then once you get out, it's then deprogramming and really kind of reprogramming in your own thoughts that this was a way of life that you experienced for a time, but it's okay to leave it. It's okay to come out of it. And even if your own family, rejects you or doesn't um, uh, connect with you anymore, you're going to be all right. You're going to find a way. That's a lot to deal with.
Oh yeah. No, I think you've already said the answer somewhat in what you've talked about, but I'd really love to delve into the difference between a tribe and cult, specifically because I've noticed a disturbing tendency among many people to label anything resembling a tribe as cult. And there is a distinct difference. I do. Humans were meant to live in social groups. We were social creatures. So one of the things that you talked about was, for instance, that permission to leave, permission to leave and not be shunned for doing so. I think that's a huge difference. But could you state some other differences primarily, and like what's a healthy tribe versus a cult?
Well, one of the things that's absolutely key in a healthy tribe is everybody has power and they
Mm,
share power. That is the key difference. If it's a power over, like I have power and you don't, and I'm going to maintain that position, and that's unhealthy and that's more cultish or, disempowering. That isn't as, that can be prevalent in a lot of different ways. So it's almost like a little rabbit hole you can go down from because, it could be there is an order that has to be maintained in certain organizations, and there is a sharing of power in that order, and you do know where you're at in that order of things in an organizational chart, in a corporation, in a company, in ways that we might do business. There is an order to that. But the ones that do the best are companies that share power, that encourage creativity, that encourage people to think autonomously, think outside of the box. Those are tribes you want to be a part of, right?
mm,
And the tribes or corporations or organizations that are less autonomy, less creative, less shared power, that's not going to be as an environment that you're going to thrive in as much. But order is a part of our structure as society, as tribes. The tribe has an order too. There usually are a core group of people in the tribe that make up the societal rules. And again, here's what we're coming back to. It's a story. It's a narrative that we tell ourselves that we make up and we all agree to.
mm. Oh, I love this. This gets to some really, really interesting things to do with organization. That's a huge challenge that you just mentioned about there has to be structure. But how do you maintain structure without having this authoritarian figure that's basically just trying to decide everything for you? And one of the ways that historically people have tried to maintain some kind of balance is with unions. So you have collective bargaining with, for instance, in an organization, collective bargaining with laborers, or say in a tribe, you'd have collective bargaining from the tribe's people, and they would then be able to present and go back and forth with whoever's in the position to make executive decisions. That has so it's really fascinating. One of the really fascinating things you can see to see maybe how cultish a certain environment might be is to see how how do they treat these kinds of organizations like activist organizations, unions, protesters, let's say, anything like that. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. In Denmark, or the Netherlands, well, maybe Denmark too, but the Netherlands specifically had some laws requiring certain businesses of a certain scale to have unions, and it was because of this, because they were trying to kind of even the scales a little bit. Now, there are actually some structures that if you incorporate them as is, it allows for that balance of power just by the structure, which I think is super interesting.
I do
And
too.
oh yeah, so there are ways like that. That's dynamic governance is the one that I look at. I'm sure that there are others. That's just the one I'm familiar with. Because in the Netherlands, so there's actually documentation that you can look up where in the Netherlands, organizations that use dynamic governance specifically were actually exempted from the union requirements because the structure itself allowed for the flow of communication. So it's also something that can be incorporated even in a school. You can have like kids in the school making decisions appropriate to their age range. So like kindergarteners can make decisions about certain, setups in the classroom, and then in high school, you can start to even potentially be on the board for things like budget decisions. But that all teaches you how to integrate from a young age. So this is a passion point of mine that you touched on at the
Good.
organization. So super fun. Mm.
And I think, what's interesting that's happening, and it is happening a little bit more in the Netherlands. I did a podcast a couple of years ago with a company that brings executives and boards together, and they do a psilocybin journey together.
Mm.
And the whole purpose of that is to enhance the creativity, the vision, the mission, and is there ways that they could work more effectively and collaboratively? And they do so with the help of the medicine and a lot of coaching and a lot of integration and getting clarity on how that company can be optimally effective. I'm so interested in that. And I would love for us, you and I, Daniel, to work with companies and help them in this way here in the United States, where we would help them to understand the options that they have for shared power, shared creativity, shared governance, and how they can optimally, effectively work and collaborating for the company for the best of all concerned.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. You're speaking my language right now.
We
I,
will
I
do it,
also
Daniel. I'm affirming it. I'm knowing it.
Yes, I also
Yes.
love I love hearing that people in the Netherlands are doing these ceremonies as well. That's amazing. And I really, really, really want to use this opportunity to touch on just how groundbreaking these entheogens can be, for society. And I also in the US specifically, and I don't know the history in the Netherlands with say the hippie movements in the 60s, but there was a huge party scene in the US that really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth with entheogens, and it caused them to think of it as a, just, oh, this is a party thing. You take this at a party, you take this at a so I would like to talk about dispelling some of those myths that this is all that the entheogen is good for, and talk about, how can we start to shift to this context where like people are using it to enrich their lives, and even as business executives to, develop a more creative and authentic workplace. I think that's amazing.
I I agree, and I think the entheogens, and particularly um, for certain populations of people, we've heard Steve Jobs used psychedelics, and he was inspired with some of his ideas. We've heard how other bands like have used entheogens to write their music to enhance the band's creativity, not just the Grateful Dead, but many other, and so, and there's also this aspect of not only helping the those that are at the top of our society that are running major corporations, um, but also we have to be accountable to those who are protecting our society and protecting our ability to have a democracy. And so that bigger picture expands out to our veterans. And I think of any population, our veterans and our first responders who are really kind of like holding the the protection around us in a way that allows us to have a democracy, allows us to have corporations, and allows us to have the financial wherewithal that we do as a country. Um, they are the ones that are suffering the most. And because of that, the entheogens, I think, are going to be more available, as we've seen just recently, because our veterans are suffering so greatly. And the way the veterans are suffering is that they are taking their own lives. There's a veteran taking his or her own life once every 83 minutes. So, in the time span of what we will do here in this podcast, somebody's contemplating that, somebody's executing that. And it's tragic. And, without some security that they offer, the protection that they offer, we don't get to have, the freedoms that we have. Um, and I don't think that war has to be our global ritual either. I believe that this may help us to actually look at war in a different way, because we can't destroy ourselves or can destroy the entire planet. That's just pure insanity. But right now, we've used war as a global ritual for managing and getting through some of these things. I would love to see us use a different model for us to have a ritual or ceremony, and it doesn't have to be destructive, where we're sharing power, sharing resources, loving the planet, loving Mother Earth, so that we evolve as a species. I think we're right at that precipice of that next evolution. And I think that the entheogens are a part of it.
Me too. And this is also a perfect segue into an executive order that just passed. And it has there's so many elements to this, like the veterans element, the accessibility element. So let's delve first into just what the executive order is, and then we'll kind of delve into a bit of the meat and potatoes of it. So the executive order on the surface, the Cliff Notes summary. It is an executive order urging the expedition of FDA approval for ibogaine, as well as the exploration of other psychedelics. And it also is requesting an allotment of finances to states for state-sponsored study of these substances. Do you have anything to add to the Cliff Notes summary?
I think that the research will be enhanced because of the reclassification. And maybe we could just touch on a little bit of what reclassification actually means.
Yes.
Because, what's the difference between Schedule 1, Schedule 2, and Schedule 3? Do you want to touch on that, Daniel?
Absolutely. So Schedule 1 is highly addictive, and I mean the chemically, physically highly addictive, psychologically addictive, all of that. It is also stated in Schedule 1 to be listed as Schedule 1, a substance needs to have no known or recognized medical usage. So think something like, let's say, like black tar heroin. Heroin has a medical usage for anesthesia, but like, black tar heroin or something really, really intense like that. That's Schedule 1. Now, psychedelic compounds, so psilocybin, mescaline, formerly cannabis, as of I think yesterday, actually.
Yesterday,
Um,
yep.
yep, was that they were listed as Schedule 1 as having no known medical usage. So I want to really emphasize when I say that. The psychedelic compounds listed as Schedule 1, that is factually incorrect. You can pull up many studies showing that they are not chemically addictive. I myself know that they're not chemically addictive as somebody that has utilized them. Had I shot up black tar heroin in my arm, I would not be sitting here in this clean room having this lovely podcast. I would be in a rehab center.
Mhm.
However, I've sat with mushrooms, ayahuasca, etc., many, many times. From personal experience as well as research data, it's just not true. So, want to put that out there because people are going to look at it and say, "Oh, whoa, psilocybin's on the yeah, no, it's you have to evaluate the substances individually, and that's part of the problem with them being Schedule 1 is that it shakes the trust in the entire system, and that's not good because the scheduling is really, really important to help people make informed choices about what they put in their body. And when you lie about what is or are dishonest about what is scheduled as what, you start to shake that foundation. So Schedule 3 is a potential for psychological dependence. However, it has a known medical usage. So that's and if you have anything to elaborate on that, please do.
I would say that the most important thing is that by reclassifying these uh, formally classified, as Schedule 1, allows for research to be done. And there's
Mm.
so much research that is in the wings, just waiting to be completed, or to be started, so that we can really delve into, what are the benefits, what are the cautions, right? It's not all a panacea. What do we need to be aware of, and the caution, and then have this made available to a scientific community as well as the medical community, and then people at large, so that we can all make better informed decisions. That's what it's all about. It's choice. So, for example, as you said, psilocybin is still a Schedule 1, which doesn't make sense at all because it is not addictive. A non-addictive, it has great benefits, but because it's a Schedule 1, it makes it so much harder for a researcher to get a license in order to study it and show the potential benefits. So by rescheduling, it will have then the potential of being licensed out to, certain research labs that are ready and waiting for this to happen. And then this can move forward, so that psilocybin, MDMA, and other, as well as the cannabis, can be studied effectively.
Absolutely. And I'd also like to give people a little crash course into two of the routes or pathways that, and they're not mutually exclusive either, that the policy can take. Just because I think there's sometimes a lot of confusion about when something is, say, legalized or access is opened, there's a lot of confusion about what that might look like. So there's legalization and there's decriminalization. Now, legalization primarily comes with licensures, restrictions, etc. So with legalization, like the worst possible route that this can take, I'll start there. The worst route that this can take is that FDA approves a synthetic compound, and nothing else. So that's the worst thing that can happen. So that's something to look out for, is for people to really hold the government accountable, and not have them just profit off of some synthetic compound and then deny access to all the anything else. Is that is a way to basically sell people an expensive pill for something that ultimately grows out of the ground for free. So that, but there is a healthy aspect to legalization, and what that is when you have properly formulated guidelines under legalization, so that if somebody were to offer, say, something like psilocybin as a medication, or if they were to sell it, there's some safeguards there. That's a healthy legalization when you have like properly thought out safeguards. I got to emphasize that. So one thing that's the legalization pathway. Again, it's there's this aspect of I'll say it's an aspect of control.
Mhm.
Some healthy, some not. Then there's decriminalization, which is the deprioritization of deprioritization for certain substances for purposes of police work, etc. So under decriminalization, you are basically the funding is completely cut off for any arrests or legal action related to whatever it is you're decriminalizing. So like if you were to, let's say, grow mushrooms and somebody were to try to arrest you, the office or department would receive absolutely no funding related to that. And it decentivizes all of it. But the really big aspect of decriminalization that I also want to talk about is an accessibility aspect. So there's different models, but the model that I've followed is one called grow, gift, and share. That means that you can't drive under the influence. That's still illegal. You can't selling without licensure is still illegal. But if you grow something, if you're gifting it, if you're sharing, you're good. And the reason that's so important is because I've had to look a lot. I've looked a lot as I mentioned, some of what happened in the 60s, and also in, say, the cannabis market, which I work in the cannabis industry, looking at some of the problems with, say, cannabis being laced with certain drugs or whatnot on the black market, and looking at what caused this. because I want decriminalization. I want people to have access, and I don't think it's right for people to have to go through expensive gates. However, when you open up access in a improper way, you get problems. And the conclusion that I've come to is the primary driver of that is profit.
Hmm.
That is what motivates people to overproduce, overconsume, to cut things with certain chemicals because they're trying to have more bulk. And that is where the legalization framework comes in, is when it comes to profit. And I'd love to hear your input on it. But for me, I believe that the absolute best possible scenario for all of this policy moving forward is for there to be a parallel decriminalization so that anything that doesn't involve profit, and to be clear, if somebody's hosting, let's say, a ceremony, they should charge for the ceremony, but not the medicine. That's common practice in ceremonial spaces. But anything related to strictly the medicine should be not for either not for profit at all, or if it is being sold for profit, it should be subject to these licensures, the regulations, etc. So what do you think of that framework as a policy direction moving
I
forward?
think it's a good framework. I think, part of what you're saying is access, right?
Yes.
So who is going to have access and who's going to be the gatekeepers? And those are the very big questions that we're dealing with right now. Who has access? Who's the gatekeepers? And is it purely profit driven, or is it people driven?
Yeah.
And there is the decriminalization is people driven, where small amounts can be grown um, by an individual for their own consumption. I think that's absolutely needs to be a part of this in every way, shape, or form. And they're doing this in many parts of the country right now. Certain states allow you to grow, for example, your own cannabis, and you grow your own cannabis and you harvest your own cannabis, but it isn't that you're going to be selling it. Just like you said, if you gift it to someone and share it with someone, that's different. But there is a parameter within which you can legally do that and not get into any trouble. I think that's important. It gives us again this relationship with the medicine. Do you understand?
Yeah.
If this is medicine that I am growing for my own health and well-being, I'm intricately involved with its growth, development, then it's connected to the earth or the soil. And so there's an integral relationship that is made between my growing the medicine for my health and well-being and taking the medicine for my health and well-being, that has a regenerative cycle to it. Does that make sense?
It it does.
It's
Not only
so
that,
beautiful.
I felt it. I felt that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. It's just such a beautiful connection.
Mm.
It's like it reclaims our ability to heal ourselves.
100%. And I want to also just urge people to really understand what happens when you don't open the door for this. So we talked about veterans before, and I have known veterans, and I won't get into details so that just for the sake of not being able to identify the circumstances or people, but I have known veterans who have had weapons pointed at them because of their work with plant medicines. So they've served their country, and then they've done what they needed to for themselves to heal from the trauma caused by that, only to have the very country that they served then point a weapon in their face, because of what they did. So when people are trying to deny access, this is a consequence. This is one of the consequences that happens. So this is why I really, really urge, whatever people's personal feelings are on plant medicines or psychedelics, even if they don't personally plan to use them or if they don't personally even like them, is it right for somebody who is utilizing these substances for their well-being to be threatened with violence for doing so? You
And
know,
that really brings us back to how many lives and families were disrupted because they were put into jail or prison because of cannabis. And
Mm.
yesterday, that all changed.
Yep.
And so, and unfortunately, many minority communities were targeted and they were penalized at a much greater number and at a much greater sentencing because they had cannabis on them. And it could have been a very small amount. Even Cheech and Chong, right? Remember what happened with Cheech and Chong? He spent time in prison because of cannabis, where today, all of a sudden, we made a new rule. And so, we have to be very careful with how we legislate and make these rules because it has a very deep effect on many different people's lives. And many families lost their loved ones to jail or prison because they had cannabis on them.
And I want to assuage people's fears on this as well because I understand that there are people that have had negative experiences with cannabis and that it's not good for everyone. I understand that there is a lot of fear around psychedelics as well, and
Yes.
and some people have utilized psychedelics outside of a healthy integrative context, which has can lead to trauma if you don't have a proper container or somebody to help you process what you've experienced. So just to assuage the fears for those people, um, this like black market that people see where they're afraid, oh, it's going to flood the streets, and these are real things that I've heard, having talked to people about this, or that this is going to be too accessible and they're afraid of people delving into something they don't understand. When you have the decriminalization framework and then the parallel legalization framework. A decriminalization framework, you are not going to be having giant warehouses of mushrooms or cannabis if people are not allowed to sell without licensure. That's just not going to happen. No, nobody at home is going to be growing. I mean, maybe if they're just crazy dedicated, I guess, but it's very you're not going to be having somebody at home filling a warehouse with this. It takes time, it takes money, it's hard work. So they're going to be growing enough for themselves and some friends, realistically, if they're not able to sell it for a profit. Now, on the other hand, with the legalization side of things and the frameworks, with companies, let's say, that are profiting, just put in legislation and safeguards that don't allow them to overproduce or to sell to minors, let's say, like anything like this, common sense legislation. If you put those two together, you have accessibility so that people can have the medicines that you need, and you also eliminate this aspect of, again, overproduction that is a huge concern for people. So there is a way to have both. You
Yes.
don't have to deny, you don't have to flood the gates.
Yes. And I think that's the sensible way forward. And I feel as though this change in um, this new executive order has perhaps given people permission to look at psychedelic medicines in a more expansive way. It's a shift culturally, it's a shift in consciousness, it's a shift in knowing that. The leaders in our country are not opposed to looking at things with fresh eyes and looking at the possibility of the psychedelic medicines being integrated into a holistic framework for our own health and well-being.
100%. That's what it's all about. I love it. And the I can already see, even in my work in the dispensary, the shift, and it's so beautiful to see people come in, let's say like they're in their 60s and their 70s, never touched any kind of plant medicine in their life, and then they say, hey, I've changed and my perspective has changed. Like I was hooked on opiates, I was an alcoholic, I was etc. And I've been looking for alternatives. And I get feedback of this changed my life or this saved my life often, both in the cannabis space and in the psychedelic space. And it's always just so wonderful and affirming to see that.
Yeah, and again, here we are with the most highly addictive substance, alcohol, available on every corner of every main highway, and you just go in and buy it and drive home, maybe already somewhat intoxicated with more alcohol. And there's so many problems with this. And yet, the it's like kind of uh just accepted, right? So I think you can drink responsibly. There are some people that have that capacity, but the bottom line is alcohol and alcoholism costs our country millions upon millions of dollars because of rehabs that are necessary, because of poor health, and the healthcare system is overwhelmed already. And so here are all these people who have degenerated their body because they've used alcohol over a long period of time. And alcohol is very harsh on the physical body. So, we do have to have some alternatives that people can look to that are easily accessible. Not everybody can go to rehab. That's a luxury for some people. They'd never be able to go. So, but can they go and get a medical marijuana card? Sure. Can they go into a dispensary and talk to a person like you who can give them some good information? Hopefully, they're as informed as you are. If they walked in and had you there serving them, they don't even know how lucky they are, because of your knowledge and your background and your expertise and your guidance that you can give people. And that's really the roles that we're going to play. We're going to be the therapists, the guides, the facilitators for this as it's coming into fruition in our culture, in our society, in our towns, in our stores. So we will be the ones that really are kind of helping to hold the container for this evolution, this next evolution to happen. And in my mind, I hold a vision that, over the next 10 years, let's say, there'll be at least 6,000 different places that people can go to that are wellness centers. They don't have to be sick to use psilocybin. They don't have to be. It's not sickness based medicine, it's wellness based medicine. And that even people who are well can even be better and accessing their creativity, or perhaps getting a vision for their own life. It's not just for sickness, it's for wellness. And so we'll reimagine what the wellness centers look like, and they'll be able to come in and sit with a person like you or sit with a person like me and be able to be guided through this in a very meaningful way that then gives them hopefulness. And that's the thing that people are missing right now. They don't have hopefulness anymore. They're getting so discouraged and so frustrated. And the systems that are available to us today in the medical system, some people don't even have any kind of medical insurance at all. And those that do are like, there's only limited what they can do. So this will be an expansiveness to a wellness center that where we're able to access and be guided and have integration groups and have small groups, large groups that do this work, hold the container together. And that's my vision. And I know it's going to come to fruition. I know it. I can feel it. There was a whole motivation behind me writing psychedelic streams and rituals, because we have to be prepared for this. And that is the preparation. How do we do pre-session? How do we do the session itself? How do we do integration? I write that all out, and I don't see it's all going to be licensed personnel. It'll be nurses, it'll be doctors, it'll be clergy. That's a whole nother avenue. That we would have the flesh of the gods as an entheogen, perhaps in our spiritual communities. I hold the vision that that can happen. And it's mindfully done with ritual and ceremony and music, and it's just an uplifting experience in a totally different way. And then there'll be facilitators that are trained so that they can hold space, because we're going to need a lot more people very quickly to be able to do this and roll this out successfully.
Amen to that. And there is already spiritual practices happening with entheogens. Yep. I am very, very blessed to have been a part of some of that, and it's beautiful. With that, I think it's a great time to close. I will leave a link to Gay Lynn's Psychedelic Dreams and Rituals book in the description. Please do leave a review for her. And it's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.